Welcome back, everyone. We are ready to start session 3. In this session, we will be talking about innovative brands and retail concepts, the next wave. This session will focus on what's next for brands and retail concepts now that this is dominating the news cycle. I'm particularly interested in this one to know how our local brands and retailers are going to shift into this new normal. The panel today will be Jeff Kettner, CEO at Kettner Group Communications, Michelle Breyer, COO of SKU, and David Matthews, Managing Director at RevTech Ventures. Over to you.
Thanks, Michelle, David. Thanks for joining today. I'll kick off with a quick introduction for myself and then turn it over to you, Michelle and David. I'm CEO of Kettner Group. We're a public relations communications firm in Austin. We also have offices in New York and Nashville. We're a B2B tech company, but we also deal primarily with retail and CPG brands, particularly technology brands. And that's how we got to know Michelle and David. So David and Michelle, over to you, and please tell us a little bit about RevTech Ventures and SKU.
Great. Hello, I'm David Matthews, Managing Director at RevTech Ventures in Dallas. We are an early stage seed capital fund focused at the intersection of retail and technology. And so we look at all things around brands and consumers and physical and online stores. And it's a very exciting space these days. You're either surviving and thriving or you're dying rapidly.
My name is Michelle Breyer, and I'm lucky enough to be the COO of SKU. We are the first consumer product accelerator in the country. We're based here in Austin, Texas, although we've been expanding rapidly over the last year. We expanded into New York with Beyond SKU last fall, and that second track is kicking off this month. We expanded into the Twin Cities this summer with Impact SKU, which is focused on purpose-driven companies. And I'm actually in Dallas today because we expanded into the DFW area in September. And we're kicking off our 9th track in Austin in January, and we're currently accepting applications. But the main focus of SKU is to take companies that have traction, passionate founders, and really surround them with first-class curriculum, and then kind of first-class mentors who have a lot of CPG experience and help them grow quickly. We have a number of success stories, including Siete, Mexican Food, Epic, Provisions, and Austin Eastsiders. And we have a great crew of companies here in Dallas. And, we had lots of conversations about retail. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, thanks to both of you. And obviously, the place to start with this is COVID. 2020 is not the year that anyone thought it would be for retailers and brands, not to mention the rest of the world, the rest of the economy. Everything changed. The plans that people had in place for 2020 are not the way that things turned out. It's been very different for retailers. What's been the impact on retailers, David and Michelle? What's been the impact on new brands?
Michelle, can I jump in and set it up for you?
Absolutely.
In retail, we all kind of know. Just picture a quadrant in your mind. The x-axis is essential versus non-essential, and the y-axis is online versus offline. So if you are deemed essential and you have a robust online business, you're probably having a great 2020. If you are deemed non-essential and you don't really have an online presence, you're probably out of business now. So it was that bifurcated this year.
Well, you're absolutely right that you kicked it off for me. We definitely saw the brands that were in our cohort who were focused on things like wellness, or beauty. We had a beauty brand that had a hand sanitizer. Those brands did well. They also did well because they had a robust online presence. We had some other companies that had no online presence and were completely dependent on retail, and they struggled a little bit more. So definitely wellness, cleansers. We had a town hall where we had 2 of the Austin-based companies, Puracy and Let Me Shine. their business went through the roof, but they were prepared for it. And also everybody was out there trying to find, different cleaning products as quickly as possible. So there were definitely the winners and the ones that struggled a little bit more.
Both of you brought up points about if you were only dependent upon having a store-based presence, you were really in trouble and may not be in business. It seemed like this year is the year where it's really become important to have an omnichannel presence. If you have the stores, you have to have e-commerce. Tell us a little bit more about that. David, I know you've observed a lot of things, and both the tech companies that RevTech invests in, as well as the retail brands that you've invested in.
Well, Jeff, I'll contrast for you the old world of retail with the new world of retail. With the old world of retail, and I'll just pick on JCPenney because they're a national department store retailer based here in Dallas. Really tough. The old world retailer started their e-commerce as like its own store, totally siloed off from their operation and not connected in any way. And over the last 20 years in the Amazon age, they've gradually figured out that online store needs to be seamlessly integrated with every way they touch a customer. So I'd say the old world brands have really finally gotten there with what's called omnichannel, which is being what the customer wants to be able to shop effectively, whether they're online or offline, or in your store shopping on your online site. But that's not enough, because I'll contrast that with the new retailers, which are digital native brands that have gone through the SKU accelerator and have grown so much they're now thinking about growing into physical stores in one way or another. And new brands that are born and scale and grow online, they will not tolerate being in a physical store environment where the customer is invisible till they get to the cash register. So when you see new brands go into physical settings, they're going to replicate that online experience in creative ways in a store. Because online, they know everything about you. They know where you came from, what you clicked on, what went in your shopping basket, and what you transacted on. They figure that out when they get to physical stores on how to know you and engage you the minute you walk through the door. The old brands, forget it. They can't figure that out.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think a lot of the companies in our cohorts, look to brands like Glossier. Glossier is an example of a digitally native cosmetic brand that started online, and they started around a lot of content. It was, content and commerce, also companies like Goop. Those are kind of the models for a lot of companies now. And, you'll see, I'm sure, Jeff, you saw the pop-up store for Glossier, which kind of supplemented their online business. I mean, it was amazing to me because Glossier sells, basic makeup, but they created this kind of allure about themselves. And when they had a pop-up store in Austin, there was a line around the block. Yes, people could have gone online and ordered, but they also loved the idea of what Glossier created, which was very experiential. So, it really supplemented what they were doing online. And, I don't know how many companies I've talked to now where that really is their model. And I think going forward, you're just going to see more of that.
Well, you touched on experiential retail, which is certainly something that we've all talked about as one of the retail concepts that seems to thrive. You go out to the Domain, and there's such an environment there. You can shop, you can live there, you can eat out there, you can take your kids there and hang out on the weekend. And it's really an immersive lifestyle experience. You go to malls, and by and large, many of them are dying. Do you think the experiential retail experience is only going to grow from here? Do you see it continuing to gain traction?
Well, I think we're at a lovely spot now where if it's like a commodity type thing, like replenishing your soap or paper towels, you hit a button. And if it's something where you really need to touch and feel and sample, you need an effective way to immerse in that. And I really think the world's separating now pretty clearly between what can be effectively achieved with the touch of a button and it arrives on your doorstep or even on your shelf, and what you really want to go and immerse in for learning, for entertainment, for sampling, what have you.
In my former life, I was a retail reporter for the business section of newspapers and trade publications, and I remember doing a lot on experiential retail, places like Anthropology and IKEA, places that you go into and it makes you want to buy things, like you want that to be your life. You walk into an Anthropology and it says a lot about who you are. It's a destination store. Whereas, to your point, I don't necessarily feel that way when I go into a Gap. No offense against Gap, but like you can just get stuff easily online at the Gap. But it's not the same experience as walking into an IKEA where they have everything set up, so that you can visualize what it would look like in your house. And you can get Swedish meatballs, which is always a good thing.
How do you feel walking in neighborhood goods, Michelle?
I love it.
Good.
Yeah.
We were a pre-seed investor in it.
Oh, good for you. That was smart. Yeah.
Matt Alexander came in my office 3 years ago with just an idea on a napkin. I'm like, it's a perfect concept and you're the perfect person. So
yeah,
the only investment I made immediately while being pitched.
Oh, interesting. When I used to cover Whole Foods, and I did a big retrospective story and interviewed a lot of people. And really what it came down to is like being in their store, carrying their canvas bag, their green and tan canvas bag. That said a lot about who you were as a person. And you walked in there and you felt a certain way. And it's not, I know I'm bashing other retailers, but I don't feel that way when I go into a Randall's.
Yeah.
So
you might go in a Central Market flagship.
Yes. Yeah. It's the same thing. You end up buying more than you would if you were ordering online. I mean, I think that's the key to successful retail is that, inspires you to purchase more because you can smell it, see it, taste it. Although that has all changed with COVID. And that's worth talking about a little bit too. A lot of brands who depended on being able to demo and sample, they're having to figure out new ways to get in front of the consumer and inspire them to purchase without having that ability to see it in front of them.
And how are they adapting to that, Michelle? Because my wife and I are huge fans of Central Market. We've mostly been doing curbside since the pandemic starts, and we've really missed the experience of being in on the weekends and trying new products. And there's always interesting demos going on, and a lot of your cohort depends on experiences like that. So how are they making up for that loss of experiential contact with their customers?
Well, I agree. I knew people who used to just go to a Costco because that's where they would eat their lunch. They would go around and taste all the different things. And so we actually had an expert come and speak to our SKU cohort about this subject. And he had some interesting things to say about alternatives, kind of a QVC model where you would set up in a store. You wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to taste right there, but you're creating kind of an interesting demo in front of them. And maybe you have single serve samples that you can give them, but you're telling a story in the store, hoping that will inspire people to purchase.
Hey, Michelle, Jeff actually introduced RevTech to a company we invested in. It's become one of our larger investments. And they pull transaction data from grocers so that consumers are fed relevant offers based.
I think, is Dave frozen? Dave, are you there?
I'm back.
Okay, I think I missed a cut. If you don't mind, I think we lost him again.
I'm sorry. I think a satellite went over. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
I'm just saying this company had a personalization platform for giving relevant offers based on what you buy, but now they've layered on wellness to where you can opt in and have offers not based on what you buy, but what your dietary goals are.
What is the name of that company? I'm curious, and you're like, I want to try it.
Yeah, it's called Bird's Eye, and
Oh,
they work with a number of independent grocers around the country. But in Texas, it's Brookshire Brothers is the first grocery store they've signed. Hopefully, they'll be in HEB and Whole Foods before long.
I think a lot of brands right now are searching for other alternatives. We have a brand, a company that came and spoke to us about, they put together sample boxes based on, like you said, it is personalized. Obviously the brands pay into them, but they pay for demos and sampling anyway. And maybe this is actually better because they're able to target it to the specific consumer who would be most inspired to purchase. And in my former business, when I owned my media company, we did a lot of sampling through our e-commerce site, and we found that half the people who sampled in some way purchased. So you got to find some way to get in front of them.
Good correlation.
Yeah, and when you walk into a store or you're looking online, you're kind of overwhelmed with so much. Like, how do you stand out as a brand? And if you could get, whether it's Birchbox or different those types of subscription boxes tend to work well too, because you're able to kind of be in a curated collection that is interesting and exciting and its own kind of experiential, kind of retail experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the subscription boxes, the ability to get samples, it's part of the surprise and delight factor that's always been a key part of retail. Because as consumers, David, you mentioned we have the things that we, the repeat purchases. It's easy to buy online and you can buy it with one click. But I think as consumers, as shoppers, we want to be surprised. We want to find new things. And I think the ability to do that and encounter that is part of what makes retail and brands so much fun. David, you mentioned neighborhood goods, and it's kind of a store you can go in and be surprised all the time. Could you talk a little about it for people who may not have visited a neighborhood goods store, either in Austin or Dallas?
Yeah, well, this is Austin Startup Week, and I'm sure some of you have experienced the new neighborhood goods store on South Congress. Ironically, they had their grand opening party, I think, on March 15th. So not the best timing, but neighborhood goods was a natural because Matt Alexander had been an entrepreneur building digital native brands for apparel, for men's apparel, and he really understood the space. But neighborhood goods curates. They have, there's just thousands of online brands that are hatched through SKU and backed by big VC funds. So neighborhood goods curates and creates kind of a pop-up department store with brands across the spectrum that are growing from online only into finding their way into physical spaces. And they have very short duration. It's kind of like WeWork meets department store. So brands will be in there for a month, maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months. So every time you go in, you get new surprises. And it's everything from a startup brand to more established brands like Fossil and Dollar Shave Club that have been through there. But really a neat experience. Every time I've gone in, seen something I didn't expect to see and was surprised and delighted and walked out spending more than I meant to.
I'd love to see a little SKU specific kiosk, a little SKU little store in there with all of our cool, interesting food and beverage and beauty and smartphone cases and things like that.
That's a great idea.
I think it's a great idea too.
They just launched, Michelle, this year a localized section of the store where they bring in consumer brands from the local area. So in Plano, they had stuff they curated from here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and in Austin, I'm sure they're doing the same. And then they have a third store at Chelsea Market in New York, and I don't know what's happening up there, frankly, because stores are just starting to reopen up in New York.
Well, I think that whole store-to-store concept, store within a store concept, is kind of the new wave of retail, because it doesn't take a big footprint for a brand. and you can, have some presence, create excitement around your brand, and without the, having to open your own store, which obviously for a lot of startups, you just can't do that. But you still get that in-store retail experience, and you're creating, Neighborhood Goods is creating that wonderful experiential retailing experience that shoppers are really craving.
Yeah, and each store feels very different. I haven't been to the Austin one yet, but the New York store and the Dallas store are very different from each other. So it's really neat how individualized they are to the market.
Well, I love the way that, there's such innovation in retailing right now. And, yes, COVID definitely had an incredible, effect, and we'll have to wait and see kind of how consumers bounce back from it. But I think, ultimately, we don't just want to shop online. So, how do we continue to get people into that retail environment in a way that is safe, but also, exciting?
Yeah, and I think people are eager to get back into the stores, and the more interesting the concept and the more you can go in and encounter new things and be surprised, the better. And I think that's why Neighborhood Goods is so successful. It's a perfect segue into talking about what, other than the stores, within stores, what do you think are the hot retail concepts, both now and where do you see them going in the next couple of years? Obviously, the old model stores like JCPenney, they're dying, but a new wave of retailers, a new wave of innovation is really, coming back to, I think, lure shoppers with much more interesting ideas. What's changing? How do you see it changing?
Well, I'll give you an example around where we shop and an example around how we shop. So around where we shop, everybody in this session can think about the retail development in your own neighborhood. You've probably seen it shift from stores with products on shelves that you push a cart around and fill your cart to being more around entertainment, dining, services like nails and spa and fitness. So a big shift away from items on shelves and toward more entertainment and dining. And then so that's for the where, the geography. For the how, a big trend I see, we're invested in an automated store concept called Excel Robotics that competes with Amazon Go. And there's probably 10 companies now that are duking it out in this area of contactless. I call it walk-in vending machines, frankly, but you check in with your app or with a QR code, and you grab whatever you want and you leave. And I think there's a real foot race underway, just like we saw in the .com land grab in the late 90s. Now for who's going to partner with which brands to have an automated store offering. But you're going to see a lot of that.
I completely agree, David. And I also, I'll use yoga as an example. You'll see these stores like Alo, which is a yoga brand, and they're, all creating huge spaces. Again, I will be interested to see with COVID, but huge studios within their stores, because they know like that excites people. When you're taking a class, you are much more likely to then want to walk out and purchase some of their products. So, I think, to your point, like creating experiences around what that product is about is going to continue to be something that retailers do. When you talked about like what's hot, we all know what's not. Like you walk into any mall, and even before COVID, they were kind of, completely. I practically saw tumbleweed rolling by, at Barton Creek Mall. Like there was never anybody there. The department stores have nothing exciting to offer except for a Nordstrom. And, Nordstrom, someone's playing the piano. They kind of they make it interesting and fun. But as a whole, there's no reason to go into a department store anymore. So these very unique experiences, where you have something, that draws you in, I think they're just going to take their place. There's going to be big empty department store spaces.
Yeah.
Agree.
I'm laughing. I hate to pile on for Dallas-based retailers that are struggling to modernize, but we have this brand here called Tuesday Morning, and there's a store in my neighborhood that's still open that hadn't closed yet. Like, how is this store here? Their average demographic is older females, I think in their 60s and 70s, and they have no online presence. And I'm not long on my investment in that one. But on the flip side of that, I think of a showroom environment where you can have a showroom out front and a micro fulfillment center in the back. And it's funny to think about what's old is new again. But as a teenager, I worked in a retail concept called service merchandise that was basically a showroom out front with a micro fulfillment in the back. And I could really see service merchandise making a comeback. We'll see.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, that would be interesting.
Modcloth is a good example of that in downtown Austin, where you go in and they have one of everything, and then you kind of order that dress or that blouse. I think for they don't have to have a lot of inventory on hand, and you still have the benefit of like feeling the fabric and seeing what the dress looks like. But for the retailer, they're not. They're not carrying that much inventory.
Another thing that can make the retail experience more experiential is making your product in the store while you're there, which it used to be limited to Build-A-Bear workshop, but now you can do a lot of things that are like custom ordered and custom created while you wait.
I've seen that done with cosmetics, where stores will make custom cosmetics and custom perfumes and things that you really couldn't do online, and but where you really need to be there to smell it or to see what the shade of lipstick is going to look like. So
yeah,
I want to remind the audience, if you have questions for Michelle and David, please send them our way, enter in the chat function. We'll try to leave time at the end to address any questions you have. David, I want to turn to a subject I know is near and dear to your heart, which, like Birdseye, there's a lot of companies that are developing technology that is having a huge impact on retail and on CPG brands. What do you see as some of the hot technology areas, both now and looking ahead for the next couple of years?
Definitely everything around automation, around sustainability, around transparent supply chain, around personalization, kind of advancing, like I was saying earlier, personalization with wellness layered on, for example. And then I think this touch-free commerce, I think there's some lingering effects of this plague we've gone through this year that we're going to have a lingering effect of wanting to be really efficient with some of our shopping experiences and not lingering too much. But, near and dear to my heart, I guess you're always excited about your newest deal. And one we're working on now is one that's leveraging blockchain technology to provide complete transparency to supply chain all the way from production of a product to end consumption. And use cases they already have underway are with coffee and with diamonds. So think about having a cup of coffee and literally having a blockchain that tells you the evolution from that product, coming, off the vine to in your coffee cup. And same with diamonds. So that's really interesting and exciting to me, the thought, because we all want to know, like, especially with food, right, Michelle? Where did this product come from, and is it safe?
Well, and I think for a lot of our SKU companies who are really, they go through our program and they're really looking at their channel strategy. And this is a really interesting time to be trying to figure out your channel strategy. You know, you may have thought it was going to be all over here. You know, we had one brand, really retail was 90% of where they saw their growth, and they had to pivot it. And they're trying to figure out some of these newer, you know, kind of exciting things that they should be doing. You know, in some cases, I'm seeing, you know, brands, especially in the beauty space, they're partnering with content sites to be kind of integrated into their content, or they're partnering with bloggers to, you know, create interesting opportunities to, you know, sell through the blogger site. You know, so I think the social media slash commerce model is becoming more popular. Looks like
we have reward style, which is just really mined this whole notion of social media and influencer marketing brilliantly.
Michelle, we do have a couple of questions that have come in. First one's on augmented virtual reality. Do you think that's going to come into play with retail shopping experiences in the future? I mean, for example, with neighborhood goods, would you be able to use virtual reality to shop?
David, you want to answer that first? I have my own opinions on that.
Yeah, I have a pretty strong opinion, probably because I've made money in augmented reality and I've lost a lot of money in virtual reality. And honest to goodness, I just don't see somebody coming from the salon and going into the shop in a store and putting on a big headset to navigate their way around. I have yet to see, I can be surprised, but I have yet to see a really good virtual reality experience. But augmented reality, where your mobile device can become an added layer of information as you walk a space, is very powerful. Just that example I gave a minute ago of supply chain transparency, you could literally hold your phone over products and see their path from inception to the shelf.
Well, and I saw a company pitch at Techstars last year that their whole concept was really about kind of a virtual dressing room where you would put in your measurements and you could see how something would look on you, and like to the point where then you had the experience of trying something on without trying it on. And I think that's an interesting virtual reality, augmented reality type of experience. Still, you know, I love the touching and feeling and seeing the fabric, and I'm the queen of ordering something online and then returning it because it didn't look like what I thought it would look like online. So I guess the closer they can get to making it, you know, as really, really close to the real experience as possible, then, you know, I think that will be successful.
Yeah, our family is the classic, buy the item you want and buy a size bigger and a size smaller and return two. I've always wondered how companies can make a profit on that model.
I'm not sure they do.
Right.
We have another audience question, which is that a lot of the shifts we've been talking about seem more like COVID's effect has just accelerated the inevitable trajectory that's already underway. And I know that again, I think the statistics about e-commerce being accelerated probably another 2 or 3 years ahead of where it would have been. And the question is, what do you think is the most surprising and unexpected pivot that any retailer or brand is doing that they wouldn't have done pre-COVID? Michelle, David, what have you seen that's just really been a surprise this year?
David, you take that first. I'm trying to think.
Right. For me, it's grocery for sure. I mean, grocery, we laugh about it. Grocery has been the laggard by far for adopting e-commerce. And it's just because that old adage is, well, people want to come check the tomatoes and the produce, you know, and not trust somebody to do that for them. But my goodness, grocery, you know, spiked from a very low adoption to a very solid adoption this year. And I think the grocers that weren't ready to handle it were really, really lost a whole lot of opportunity that they're probably sick about. And the ones that were ready really capitalized. My goodness.
Yeah, HEB, I would put at the top of that list. They really, like, I don't think you can go into an HEB now without seeing somebody pushing a cart. And I know that even though we can go into a store now, we're still ordering online because we saw how easy it was, and what a good experience it was. And that, but I still like going into, it doesn't totally replace the grocery store for me.
I have to give a shout out to Richard Schwartz and his team at Pinsa Systems there in Austin that we invested in a couple of years ago. I don't know what kind of crystal ball Richard has, but developing an inventory management system for grocery utilizing machine vision with drones that fly around stores and investigate the shelves. Somehow he saw 2020 coming, but having something that mitigates out of stock inventory on grocery shelves was a pretty good idea going into 2020. Way to go, Jeff.
I still don't think he did a good enough job with toilet paper and Clorox wipes.
Well, missed the boat there.
Yeah.
That gets into supply chain issues, and I think one of the big weaknesses, and it's a little bit of a surprise, is that supply chains were really exposed. I think also forecasting systems, because you really have to have the ability to forecast these unexpected spikes and have the supply chain react to it. I think it's going to be really interesting this winter to see if retailers are doing a better job managing their supply chains. And again, hats off to HEB. They were in January, they were already talking to their Chinese suppliers, and they were looking at what was going to be hitting the United States, and they were ahead of other companies by a long shot in terms of anticipating what was coming and ramping up inventory. We still had those toilet paper and paper towel shortages, but they were ahead of some others. So we have another question come in. What tips do both of you have for retail brands and CPG brands that are just getting started? What advice would you give them?
Definitely invest in creating a robust online strategy. I mean, it really makes sure that you're working with an online, digital marketing company to help you with whether it's getting your online store, your D2C presence up and running, getting on Amazon, making sure that you're really set up for that, because I think a lot of companies may think they can do it themselves and don't have the expertise in it, and then you leave a lot of money on the table. So really making sure that you prepare for that. I mean, we have some companies that are in the frozen or refrigerated categories. That's a little bit more difficult, but if you have the ability to sell online, making sure that you are prepared for that. Companies that had to pivot quickly, it was difficult, but having that consultation of somebody who can really provide you with the tips and the tricks that are going to allow you to really succeed online, I think would be my suggestion.
David, you have something to add to that?
I'd say for retail concepts, definitely test it, and I'll give a good case study example of it. We saw a concept of kind of dry bar for women with textured hair here in Dallas, that they tested it with pop-up shops, and they just had demand way beyond supply, and so it was kind of a no-brainer to fund them for a first store. And now the first store, even this year through the plague, they got a slow start, but they didn't go to jail for opening the salon, and they've scaled up rapidly. But I think really test to make sure you're meeting an unmet need with something that provides a solution that's 10 times better than the alternative, because that's what you have to stand out as a startup.
I would say, people kind of laugh at this, but farmers markets are a great way to test your product. I mean, early on, farmers markets, food trucks, if you're in the food and beverage industry, we've seen so many successful companies come from food trucks, many that have gone through SKU tracks because they have this great opportunity in a relatively low cost way to test their product. So I agree with you, David. Like any way you can test it before putting it out there into the, into the retail environment, you're going to benefit from that.
Another audience question. We're at the 5-minute warning. What advice do you have for retail startups? They're pitching VCs, and I think maybe looking at both from the concept of a retail startup, a brand, as well as a retail tech company, because you have, companies are pitching you all the time. Michelle, you're looking for companies to join your next cohort. How do people get in the door, and how do they get funding ultimately?
You want to take that first as an investor?
Sure. Well, for getting in the door, I mean, in this way, some things have changed, some things haven't changed. It's always best to get in the door through a warm introduction, and LinkedIn can really work magic there, obviously. But I get 100 cold pitches a day from people all over the world that I don't know, and the one that's referred to me by Jeff Kettner that I do know, that he's already screened to know that it's relevant to what we invest in. That's very important. And for me, we just look for team with relevant domain expertise so they know working on and have some experience in it. A product that's truly disruptive, like I said, at least 10 times better than the nearest alternative. And then a go-to-market strategy that makes sense, where you can really connect the dots. And like we were talking about a minute ago, that could be a pop-up shop or an online store, and then scaling into a first store for a retail concept. And for a technology, finding a first pilot. I mean, Theatro piloted their product a few years ago with one container store in Austin, Texas. And that container store must have been very patient as they developed that technology. But now that technology for store associates to communicate more effectively with customers is now deployed in thousands of stores throughout North America.
When we look for brands to bring in, because obviously SKU is looking for brands that have the ability to scale and potentially will have an exit. So we're looking at a lot of the same things that a VC would look at. We look for a disruptive product that meets a need or does something in a different way in a hot category, and a very passionate founder with a good compelling story as well. Like most of our founders created a product because of their own, a problem that they were having, and they created a solution. And I think more than ever right now, so many consumers want to purchase products where they feel connected to the founder. That's why indie brands are doing so well. So we really, when we listen to pitches for people who are applying, we want to feel that passion that founder has, because that also says that they're going to work hard and they're going to do what it takes to make their company a success. So it's kind of that, and then there's a little bit of special sauce around it. You just kind of have a gut feeling around some companies. You can't really tell why, but you like them and you believe in them.
Here's a question you can both have fun with, and this will probably be the last question for the day. It's not coming from my dog, it's coming from an audience member. We've got a lot of shopping mall space that's sitting empty, and there's going to be more on the way. This is your chance to brainstorm just for a minute. What would you do with all that space? What's going to happen to it?
Oh man, I love examples that I've seen. There's an old shopping mall on the West Coast somewhere that's like a drone racing venue. That's incredible. But I think the more general repurposing of shopping malls is going from a single use of lots of stores and a food court to a real mixed use development with residential and office and entertainment, casual dining, and a little bit of retail geared toward experiential. So not a store with a bunch of shelves, but more like a Peloton shop.
Jeff, you being in Austin, you are familiar with Highland Mall, and that became a community college. It became a branch of Austin Community College. I thought that was a really creative way to use that space, and they turned it into a beautiful it's a beautiful, very light and airy place to go to college. So that was, and then all around it, they built mixed use apartments. And so it's really a very creative way of taking that and turning it into something much more useful.
Michelle and David, thank you both. And we're at time. And I'll pass it back to you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was such an interesting conversation on the future of retail space.